Shara, there's a request for you to record. Can you do that, please?
Okay, Sharad, once you start recording, we're good to go. Thank you. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, members of the media. Thank you for joining us this morning for the AFC's live press conference, virtual press conference. This morning, we're going to have two statements from starting first with the Honorable Kemraj Ramchatan, Member of Parliament and leader of the Alliance for Change. And Mr. Ramchatan will speak on the current state of the police force and also some issues involving EITI. That will be followed by Dr. Vince Adams, former head of the EPA, and having welcomed everybody and said those few words, I'd like to ask Mr. Ramchatan to go straight into his presentation.
Thank you very much, Kathy, and a warm welcome to the members of the press who are here in this press conference. This is a statement in relation to the Guyana Police Force's recent rampage and death and destruction in Essequibo. The Alliance for Change finds very unsettling and most disturbing the obvious violations of operational procedures and outright criminality by members of the Guyana Police Force in Essequibo recently, which led to the killing of well-known businessman Orrin Boston. The explanation from headquarters that it was unaware of why this invasion of homes of innocent Essequibans that morning of the 14th of September 2021 has set a rot in the reputation of the Guyana Police Force, a reputation which noticeably had been stabilized under the APNU AFC administration during the period 2015 to 2020. It is evident
recording in progress.
Matters are being decided and instructed from a source other than the leadership of the Guyana Police Force. That could only mean political interference. The PPP government has demoralized the professionalism of the force by a number of interferences, including the invalidation of the Police Association's elections, the invalidating of 139 policemen's promotions, which were determined constitutionally so by the Paul Slow-led Police Service Commission, and the ill-conceived, unconstitutional establishment of regional security forces for which it allocated $700 million in the 2021 budget. The AFC condemns the use of SWAT from Georgetown to effect arrests on suspects who are all well known to CID in Essequibo. That use of SWAT was to drive fear and cower ordinary Essequibans and Guyanese. Why these arrests could not have been in the normal course by local detectives trained in these matters is a question that must be answered properly by the Guyana Police Force. See notes too, as is the consequences of such executive lawlessness, that the trust and good relationship between the community and law enforcement, which is so necessary for a functional police force, have dipped to almost zero in Essequibo Coast. The resentment by Essequibans has seen them taking their own action to see justice done. This is disastrous on so many levels for Guyana. The AFC calls for an independent inquiry, preferably from overseas, into this recent rampage, destruction, and death by members of the Guyana Police Force. The second statement has to do with EITI, the Extractive Industries Transparency Institute, and government's unwillingness to constitute the local national board. Though EITI was glibly talked about by the PPP since 2010, a Guyana chapter never came to fruition so as to ensure that reports as to the goings-on in the extractive industries could be made public. As was typical of the PPP then and now, transparency was and is not its hallmark. They're simply playing games and fooling the public. In 2016, the coalition government insisted on transparency and accountability, and as mandated by EITI International Standard, established a multi-stakeholder group in an open and transparent manner. An EITI secretariat was established. Guyanese witnessed the publication of the first ever EITI report, comprising some 6,000 pages. It is all on the internet. Then there was a second EITI report under the APNU FC government, and that was also published and is publicly available on the internet. The whole world has access to these two reports, which reveal the massive corruption that took place between the PPP elite, its ministers, and the bigwigs in the mining sectors, who, as we all know, are the financiers of the PPP-C. Since the expiration of the life of that secretariat in March 2021, the PPP, if it wanted continuing transparency, should have named its 4 representatives in the multi-stakeholder group. The big miners too don't want their methods of doing business to be made public. It will reveal a rampant landlordism, which Minister Trotman and Brooms previously sought to bring to a halt. From all appearances, they want the PPP Civic to stifle the growth of the local EITI and eventually pull out from the international EITI. The EITI International Board oversight is scheduled to commence on the 1st of October, 2021. And this requires a multi-stakeholder group to be in place. If this is not done, then Guyana will be suspended from this prestigious international EITI body. The PPP government's commitment to democracy, which includes transparency and openness, of course, will be questioned. Consequences detrimental to Guyana will flow. The AFC calls on the government to immediately appoint a new MSG, that is the multi-stakeholder group, in accordance with the EITI's standard. Additionally, the AFC calls on the government to thereafter strengthen the capacity and staff of the local EITI secretariat, which is responsible for executing the decisions of the multi-stakeholder group. The AFC calls on the government to enact legislation to make the entire EITI standard legally binding, and it be made a statutory body independent of its operations of any ministry or minister or being a department thereof. And finally, it being with the provisioning of financial assistance in the form of stipends to the hardworking members of the multi-stakeholder group. Those are the 2 statements and calls and recommendations that I would like to make this morning. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Ramchatan. And now I would like to ask Dr. Vince Adams, former director of the Environmental Protection Agency in Guyana, to make his statement, please.
Thanks, Kathy, and good afternoon, and welcome to all of my news media friends there. And but I wanted to address a few recent developments that I think should be worrisome to every single member of the Guyanese community. You know, you cannot have a country without strong institutions. And there is no institution that should be stronger than the Environmental Protection Agency in any country, especially at the stage where Guyana is, where development is just going to be really accelerated here in the next few years. And you know, I don't think there's anybody, any one of us, I've never met anybody who would not say that your health, safety, and well-being, and the environment, especially your health, is not the most important thing to you. Even the Exxon head used to say, "Hey, Vince, you know, the Rod Hensey used to all every time we say, hey, you know, the EPA is the most important agency in the end." When I arrived in October of 2018, you know, I was, first of all, even in my interview for the job, and by the way, it wasn't a political appointment. I replied, and I was interviewed. Even the interviewing panel did not even know that I belonged to the AFC or I was even involved in politics. It was after I was selected, I made it known to the chairman, etc. So even they did not know that. But anyway, so even they said, Vince, you know, you've got, you know, when I was expressing my vision for the agency, etc., they were saying, hey, you know, Vince, this is a totally different environment. You know, you cannot change the culture of the folks. And I said, okay, well, watch us. When I arrived, I asked the staff, you know, well, what are some of the issues and challenges we have? And I heard things that were very depressing. We had things such as we were a toothless tiger. Nobody respected us. It was just a place that where you were holding on until you got something better. It was dysfunctional. You're just showing up to get a paycheck. And the most troubling part was that they said that all of this was caused and even humiliated the staff. When they made decisions, politicians would make a call and overturn it. In just the short 22 months that I was there, due to the hard work and dedication of the staff, they were able to turn all of that around in an astronomically big way. They restored respectability, they lifted the morale, and one of my key goals and aim was to retain, which is you could only build an organization if retention of staff, which is the most valuable asset, is very important. So, and the EPA just used to be people just coming in, holding on for a little while, and they leave. All of that got changed. Training, and international networking, salary increases and bonus promotions. But the point of all that is that everything it was it was based upon performance. And the most important thing that happened in that agency when I was there, not a single politician got involved or even called me. Well, I got a few calls here and there, but I all made it clear that we're going to make our decision. We're going to make sure that things go fast, but it's going to be based on the EPA principle. EPA suddenly became the place to work. Everybody wanted to work. I remember when we were applying, when we were setting out requests for staff for recruitment. When the staff came in, when they came in for the interview, my main question was, why do you want to work at EPA? Why do you want this job? And everybody, they were saying, hell, based on what they're seeing with the recent developments, EPA, this is where they want to come. We hired scientists and engineers that didn't exist before. Customer service became the mantra of the agency. And we established 2 regional offices to provide that customer service, 24-hour hotline. We established a registry. Before we had no document control whatsoever. We didn't know how many projects we had out there, what the status of these projects, etc. The place was like a junkyard. We had a whole bunch of junkyard vehicles. All of that was cleaned up. We didn't have vehicles for the staff to go out there and monitor their operations. We had 1.5 vehicles to do the whole country's work. When I left, we had 8 new brand vehicles without even asking for an extra penny from the treasury. And we got that because the staff dedicated themselves. They went out there. We found that there were over like 600 operations that were out that had expired, some over 15 years. We collected that money that was due us, and so we used that money to do what we had to do. The worrisome development that I'm now driving at is what is happening at the EPA, is that all of these institutional pillars are now being destroyed and torn down. For example, the key staff, these are the same people who were responsible for bringing the agency, turning the agency around. They're leaving or forced to leave. They're being demoted. Their contracts are being negated. A good example is a lawyer that I had recruited. Probably I had a lot of lawyers who work for me here in the United States, and I would put him up against any lawyer that ever worked for me, and even though he wasn't expert, but very, very bright. As a matter of fact, I did not even know. I heard that he brought second. He was brought second at the Ewing Law School in his graduation class. Was he removed because he was so principled and he was standing up to Exxon? Now, this was the lawyer who was taking Exxon to court, mind you, and when they were refusing to pay their fines, everybody else were paying their fines and accepting, and they were improving their performance and their operation. But Exxon decided that they're the big bad wolf. They control the country, so they refused to pay a fine of $500, which was the maximum fine we can impose. And we decided to take them to court, which is what this young lawyer was doing. Was that why he was removed? Very principled guy, and I know that for a fact. I hadn't spoken to him, but these questions have to be raised as to why you would not want to have somebody like that on our side of the fence. One of the most important things, we hired even a special lawyer to look at the 25-year EPA Act, which has never been changed since inception of the agency. That has been put in the back burner. What I understand is that that's not important. Imagine the oil and gas is the most important thing that's going to be driving our economy. And that act was developed before we even thought we were going to get oil and gas. It doesn't have a single word in the act that says oil and gas. So now we're trying to figure out how do we apply the act to managing oil and gas. I hear the government up to recently saying, well, we've got to really have a big, better oversight, and we're going to strengthen our oversight. Now, that to say it is one thing, to do it is another. How could you be saying that you're going to be beefing up your oversight when you're just destroying the morale and getting rid of the people? And these are the best employees. You're cutting back on training. It's not necessary. I worked with the bank, or the EPA worked with the World Bank to develop a plan with the 36-man team to provide oversight of the oil industry offshore, to have a 24/7 personnel present on site. And trust me, I've been there. The only way you can understand and know what is going on is being on site 24/7 and not depend on what the contractor tell you. And I guess I bet you Exxon doesn't want that. So now that has been put aside basically. So I don't know what's happening with the plan. And here's something that the media ought to be troubled about. All the transparency, because again, these are values that I instilled in the organization. You tell the public the truth, and you guys know in the media, that I never held back. Whether it made the agency look bad or not, that was the truth. And one of the things that you remember we had was the challenges of having proper equipment to go out there and do measurements. And I said, and my staff, I said, here, if anybody calls and they want, just say, hey, we don't have the equipment to do it. We had some things in the pipeline where we procured a lot of equipment. Guess what? They're being told now. It's insane. I mean, those are the words. It's insane for any member of the staff to go there and tell the public that we do not have equipment. That's what they're being told. So here again is just transparency stuff. Now, and decisions being overturned by the politicians. So what you hear now from the staff is that we've gone right back to before I got there. So that's where the agency is, and it's not well. It doesn't speak well for the agency and for the country. And when I hear the politicians say, well, they're improving environment, that's not the case. Some recent manifestations of the retrogression of these institutional pillars are, I'm sure every one of you have been looking at what I would call a scandal of the situation at the bridge, where the agency comes out in I think November of last year and say, guess what? You need to do an EIA, environmental impact assessment, for that bridge, which is, you don't even have to think about it. Even the ministry who are, that owns the bridge say, hey, you know what? We're going to be doing your EIA. That's November. Suddenly, just maybe a few weeks ago, you're hearing the government, well, no, the EPA comes back and say, well, guess what? You don't have to do it. That is crazy. I think that is so absurd and in your face and blatant. An EIA is the most important document that you can do on any big project, and you can't tell me that's not a big project. And then to call it a replacement, it's a totally different bridge, totally different design in a different location. You've got mangroves to deal with. You've got pilings. You've got the current to deal with. You've got sedimentation. And then, it's kind of funny to hear the honorable minister saying, well, piling is no big deal. We do that all the time. Heck, I would like for the minister to go live right close by where you're driving a pilot, driving these piles. And guess what? What is so ironic is that even EPA building that is in Sapphire, the original design was to drive piles. Guess what? As soon as we started driving piles, we had to stop because of what it was doing to the neighborhood. We had to have a totally new design. We had to abandon the piling and use a different foundation. So to say that piling is not going to affect, the residents and whatever else is around them is just ridiculous. So, and one of the things that came up here recently, what even I hadn't even thought of it, was somebody brought up in the newspapers the flying path going into Ogle, apparently the bridge and everything in it. So those are the kinds of things you have to accumulate that type of information before you make your decision. And the most important thing EIA does is establish your baseline as to what you have. So if you got anything, you can see where things are going or getting, not going out of whack, or where pollution is increasing. Now I'm going to get to my favorite topic, because every time I think that things are bad enough, it gets worse. Flaring. Again, I don't think I have to tell anybody that flaring is a bad thing. Even now, Exxon and the other big majors are under pressure to stop flaring. Exxon said they've made a declaration after pressure from their internal body that I think they're going to be cutting back flaring or emissions by 45% by the year 25 or 2030. However, they want to increase flaring in Guyana. And then when I hear, it's really sad and disappointing to hear the government bragging that we've collected $2 million US. $2 million US in fines. Is that what our lives are worth? Because that's what flaring does. We're saying, and guess what? We've just increased the fine from $30 per ton of CO2 to $45. But I'm going to show you what those numbers mean in a little while. And then we're still going out there. I cannot believe that we are still going out there and excusing away this 14 billion cubic feet of gas that the government has been clearing, that is in the EIA, and it doesn't exist. And they're still peddling this nonsense to excuse away the $14 billion fine. I mean, the 14 billion cubic feet that was illegally flared. So if you want to talk about flaring $2 million, what we should do is go back and say, well, okay, that 14 billion, it was illegally flared. Give me that $30 per ton on that 14 billion that was illegally flared. And I believe that's why they keep mentioning it, because they don't want to go there. That would have been 30 million. At least it's better than the 2 million. And the other thing you hear is that they're increasing the environment. They make it more rigorous. Well, they've not. They've stopped. When I was there, we forced Exxon into an unlimited liability coverage for anything that happens. We had a 2-day flaring requirement, when you start up, which is consistent with the United States, this government went ahead and changed it to 60 days. You allow flaring for 60 days, we're talking about billions of cubic feet in that 60 days. And then you're saying, well, it's under the polluter pays principles, which is, I can't believe that they'll be saying that, which means, as I interpret it, which is not the way that what the principle says. The principle is polluter pays is after the fact. When you pollute something, you need to pay for it. How they're interpreting, as long as you can pay for it, you can go ahead and pollute. It's like telling somebody, you can go rob a bank as long as you pay the fine for the bank, but you can still keep what you keep. So it's totally ridiculous. And then they're saying that, and by the way, what I'm saying here, it's documented. Where when I was about to leave, we had a team, a government team, EPA, GGMC, Department of Energy, and the Canadian consultants that the same government hired, and they all agreed with me unanimously that it must be 2 days of flaring, and you cannot dump any water, and it's documented. And as soon as I left, they changed it, and now they changed the law or the regulations to make it 60 days. So when I talk about it, they say, well, no, there's nothing that exists. Well, yes, it exists. The media should ask them to produce those documents to show where it exists. As a matter of fact, we met with Exxon and say, Exxon, this is what you have to do. So it does exist, and I think the media should challenge them on that. When you hear that, you hear these statements from the government, you cannot flare for 48 hours because it's impossible given the nature of the installations. Now, what the government knows, I don't know of anybody who's an expert in the government to talk about what's impossible. You know where that is coming from. Those are Exxon's words. Even further than that, they went beyond the 60 days. They went and put in the Payaro permit. In clause 3.4, it basically exempts all flaring. Clause 3.4 says that all flaring costs, if any part of the gas handling equipment is under maintenance, flaring is exempt. Well, guess what? That's exactly the situation we have now, where the compressor, which is part of the gas handling equipment, is under maintenance, which means that all of the flaring is exempt. And they're going to make that the standard. So these are the kind of ridiculous things that you hear. Let's face it. And I really don't fault Exxon. I really don't fault Exxon. Exxon is here to make as much money as possible. And let me tell you, these folks, I've worked with them. Well, not Exxon itself, but the biggest corporations in the world. And the one thing they understand is authority. And if you're weak and they can get away with whatever they want, their bottom line is to make money. And as long as they can get away with what they are to make a few bucks, that's what they're going to do. It's our institution that matters. It's our institution. And they understand that. They're not going to tell you that they're not going to do anything that you tell them that they've got to do. But I don't know if we know that or we just kowtowing to them or what. And, imagine Exxon tells us, and I say this all the time. Remember I said they're cutting back, they make a commitment to cut back their flaring and emissions by 45% in the rest of the world. And when we were reviewing the Payaro again, their justification for flaring was to say that Guyana is a carbon sink. Guyana is a carbon sink, which means that you've got capacity, folks, to absorb pollutants. Which I can't say anything that would be more callous than that. Now, I don't want to give the impression here. I don't think anybody is a bigger advocate than me for oil and gas production. As a matter of fact, I've been in these battles and these debates with them really, strong-headed environmentalists who think that we should stop production. I say no. As a matter of fact, I even agree with the vice president that we should not even have any restriction on a production schedule. We need to produce as fast as possible, and so that we can have that revenue. I don't know what oil and gas was going to do, especially with the pressure that is coming down to cut back on oil and gas production a few years from now. So we need to, I'm all in favor of, but you can do both at the same time. You know, this whole idea that you can't do both at the same time, technology allows you to produce as much as you can while at the same time protecting the environment. That's why you've got this concept that is called best available technology. I don't think, you know, there's always some kind of a risk, and it's best available technology. Folks, if you hadn't been listening, take note of what I'm going to say here, because this has now become the new, you know, highlights of the you know, the government justification for flaring in terms of this fine. You remember I said, you know, the claim is, well, we're going from 30 to $45 for cubic feet, etc. Now, Exxon was flaring. I think they said they were flaring like 15,000 cubic feet. That's the other thing, you know. They're saying they're doing that. Nobody knows, and you hear all kinds of stuff that it has to be more than that. But no, they're not giving the information, at least to the public and probably even to the EPA. But anyway, here's where the position is. In the most recent repair of the equipment, they said that, well, we are now flaring 6 million cubic feet. The above pilot, you know, you get down to pilot, that's where the goal is. And while we're doing that, we're going to be paying this $45 per ton. Okay, folks, here's a number you need to keep in the back here. Every barrel of oil that comes up under the ground brings up 1,000 cubic feet of gas. I don't care what they say. They cannot control that. So that's a fact. So guess what? Do some little, just a little bit of arithmetic. To cut back 6,000, I mean, to cut back by the, you know, that 6 million cubic feet to get the pilot, all you've got to do is cut production by 6,000 barrels. When I said that, you know, at one time they have the number, I think they had to cut like 15,000. Or they said it's not that simple. You see, that's the thing they get away with. I want them to bring their technical person, their petroleum engineer, to say that that's not the fact. I don't want a manager to come and say, well, that's, I mean, just accept it. Well, that's not, that is, you know, that's too simple. That's nonsense. You learn that.
Doc, I don't want to interrupt, but I do want to make sure we have time for the reporters to ask questions.
Okay. Let me
all
right, good. So let me on this, because I think this here is really important.
Sure.
So if you cut back, so all you've got to do to get to that pilot is cut your production by 6,000 barrels per day. So let me tell you why it's not economic for them. And that's the argument that they're using. It's economic. If you know how much it costs, how much it would cost for flaring, that $45 per ton, that 6 million cubic feet of gas, that if you know how much it's costing, if they're paying a fine, it's about $20,000. I did some rough calculations based on assumption, because you know I don't have all the details of the gas content. It would cost, they would have to pay a fine of $20,000 US. You know how much they're gonna lose by cutting back just by that 6,000 barrels per day, based on the current price of $75 per barrel? $450,000 per day. So guess what? They're not, as far from their end, they're not going to want to lose revenues of $450,000 per day to pay this paltry fee of $20,000 per day. So when you hear, you know, all this stuff, well, you know, we charging and we paying for, you know, we receiving 2 million and they're paying for it. It's you know, it's a smoke screen to let it appear as if that you know, it's a no-brainer as far as they're concerned. And just let me finish with this. In yesterday's newspaper, which you know, I must compliment the newspaper for covering, there was a case in Ecuador where they stopped 447 flares in Amazon. And this is the judge ruling in the decision making to cut back the greenhouse gas by 24% while eliminating health risk. And it says quote, the impact of it violated the rights to water, health, food sovereignty, and a healthy and ecologically balanced environment. The government defense was economics. It's going to interfere with the economics of the country. And the judge said, which is what I was getting at, the judge said the ruling is not an eradication of flaring, but it's an eradication of flaring, but not a deferral of all drilling, which is exactly what I say. You can do both if you do the right thing to prevent the flaring. So I'm going to stop there for now and ask for questions, if any available.
Thank you very much, Doc, for your very extensive coverage of those issues. I think it was very, very detailed for our media. Can I invite the media to ask any questions they may have based on our presentations this morning? Please do the customary raise your hand and identify the organization that you come from. And I see Nazima Raghuber from Prime News has a question. Nazima, please go ahead.
Thank you. Two questions, one for Mr. Ramjatan and one for Dr. Vince Adams. Mr. Ramjatan, under what circumstances is the SWAT team deployed based on your experience as Minister of Home Affairs? And what usually happens before that deployment? Is it that it's reported to the police commissioner? Is it also reported to you? Given that your portfolio is security and all of that, I'm talking about when you were minister. And Mr. Adams, if you can, I don't know how briefly you can do this, but we see quite a lot of approvals for onshore facility in Port Demerara, well, Georgetown, but the Demerara River. Can you walk us through what EPA has to do, look for, and what satisfies the EPA before those approvals are granted, especially for the Demerara River? Thank you.
Sure.
I'm going to ask Kamran to go first.
Yeah, thanks. Nazima, the operational matters are exclusively outside of any minister. Operational matters, that is, whether you will take from Georgetown and carry the SWAT team up to Essequibo or to Lethem, wheresoever, those are operational matters. And the exclusive authority that is responsible to the minister for that is the Commissioner of Police or Acting Commissioner of Police. He sometimes delegates that to his commanders or assistant commissioners or deputy commissioners. But the minister does not have to know operational matters at all. As a matter of fact, in the Discipline Services report, in which Mr. Granger and Mr. Anil Nandalal and some other persons were, they made it quite clear and they quoted the law about all of that. So in relation to whether the SWAT team was going to Essequibo, a minister ought not to know. However, you can have political interference, as I had heard about whilst being a minister, as to what used to happen before, especially with Gadraj and so on. And so we halted that because that is not what you're supposed to do. The SWAT team and the policy behind it, which is supposed to be now effected by the Commissioner of Police, is to only confront and be used when there is a threatened, violent situation that they see could happen. So if you're going to go now and arrange the arrest of some cocaine fella who is in his house or whatever, you generally do that through your detectives in the various stations of the unit, or you can send some detectives from Georgetown. But the SWAT is almost like a national security issue, that they got people who are going to be like what happened at Bath Settlement, when they were running the police all over the place and so on. You can send in your SWAT to deal with people who are violating the law like that, and has a heightened threat of violence, especially to the police force. And that's what is supposed to happen, or circumstances like those. before you can send the SWAT out. It is special weapons and tactical arrangements that you're confronting. And that's kind of a scenario whereby they wanted, as far as I understand, some very well-known businessman in Essequibo. Why you need the SWAT for that? The SWAT for that? It is crazy. So it was not in my deduction of the usage of SWAT in Essequibo in those circumstances. And that is why I now understand the crime chief too, and Deputy Commissioner Blenheim is saying that they, up to now, haven't gotten any reason why that SWAT team was there to make the arrest. I heard it from the news last night, Prime News. So it is important that we get the distinction between operational matters and so on. But what we are also hearing is that a number of these operational matters are being asked of local commanders by the politicos of the PPP, bypassing a number of the senior leadership. And that is terrible political influence in operational matters. Then you can send people, some policeman to arrest Ramjatan or Nazima or whatever, and the larger police force do not know, about these important matters. So that's my answer to you there, Nazima.
Thank you, Comrade Ramjatan. Dr. Vince Adams.
If I can get a quick follow-up, sorry,
Sure.
on that. You were calling for an investigation led by somebody internationally. That's what you
That's
said?
right. Yes, that's what I'm indicating. It could be a regional CARICOM former commissioner of police and so on. Because look, the distrust that has happened, over 10 instances of distrust coming from the political interference of the PPP government, I believe that a report that has a kind of independent status from someone overseas with international repute, like a former commissioner of Barbados or somebody, or even from England, if you go that far, will help in this situation. And they probably could also make some recommendations too, as to how not to utilize your SWAT and things like that, and even fine-tune that. So I believe those that kind of inquiry will get the trust that I would want, and I'm certain the public would want.
Dr. Adams, please.
Yeah. Yes. And the process is really very simple. As a matter of fact, when I got there, that was one of the processes that I changed, and I think that was one of the questions that came out in the reporting, is that they were going to follow a new process, and then suddenly they said, well, okay, no, we're going to switch back to the old process that they had from day one, which didn't make any sense to me, because that one of the things that's missing in the EPA are there hardly any processes as to which you go about your business. You bring in an application, and depends on which officer you speak to, they go about their own way. However, if you really look at the process that should be followed, an applicant comes in, let's say a specific case of a shore base, come in, you look at it. The first question you ask, or you look for in the application, do they have a title or authorization to use that land? And the second thing, are they in the right zone? So those are the two questions that, so we get in, we look at their paperwork, and if necessary, we meet with the CHNPA if there are issues, or even meet with lands and surveys. But one of the things that I did, I set up a meeting every 2 weeks with CHNPA and lands and surveys for us to go through those issues that may come up. So when you look at that, you pass that test, then the EPA now is going to look at it and say, well, okay, what is the risk? If there's basically no risk whatsoever, let's say it's a hotel, it's not on the seashore where you got to cut mangroves or anything, and just the construction, that could basically qualify, I would say, as where you don't have to do any EA. But for a big project such as a shore base or a bridge, without question, because you start raising all sorts of questions, like in a shore base, you got to cut mangroves. As soon as the word mangroves come, it triggers an EIA question, because it's not even there's several agencies and even NARI is involved in mangroves administration, etc. So you have to get all of those in, especially the mouth of the Demerara River. Where 90% of the commercial traffic comes through to the nation. You know, it's very shallow. You got the mangroves problem, etc. So as soon as those questions are raised, you need to get the details. And it's not that you want to stop the project. It's just that you want to know what are the risks so that you can mitigate against the project while you during construction and while operating. So it's not to stop the project, but what happens is an EIA can take 6 months, it can take a year, it can take 2 years in any part of the world, not Guyana alone, because you need to have public input, you have exports involved. So that's the process basically. As long as they satisfy the test of that they've got the right, they're in the right zone and they've got the title or authority to use the land, EPA looks at the risk. And any questions that are raised that cannot be answered there, then you go into an EIA where you do these extensive studies, you get the public input, etc. And here's an example. That same issue with the cutting down of the mangrove across the river from Georgetown. The developers came in, they met with me and my technical staff, and they said they wanted to build a shore base. I said, well, you know that you've got to do an EIA. They said, how long is that? I said, well, it could take 1 year, it may even take 2 years. I don't know. So, well, okay, we're going to cut back. We're not going to do a shore base anymore. We're just going to do a storage facility inland. Now, that required just probably an EMP. So we said, okay, apply for that, and you can go ahead. And then later on, if you want to do, you can extend to a shore base. Well, lo and behold, so they never applied for that shore base. So we even met with the minister, and he asked me, well, what do they need to? I said, hey, these are the rules. They cannot do anything without this EIA. We helped them. We flew drones over the place, all kinds of stuff to convince them they have to do an EIA. And lo and behold, as soon as I left, they went cut down the mangroves without even applying for a permit to build a shore base. So that's the kind of thing that is happening in Guyana now, that it seems as if the EPA, and here's the one thing I want to defend. Well, I don't think I have to defend them, but the staff is very frustrated that these decisions are being made and they don't know how these decisions are being made. Like this change in decision at the bridge. You ask the staff who's supposed to be involved and they're embarrassed. They because they said one thing because they thought it was a no-brainer to say you need an EIA, and then suddenly it got changed. And even there at a loss as to how it was changed. But anyway, so that is the process. You look and see if they've got the authority to use the land, and then you look at it to see the risk. And as long as there's some serious questions, you say you got to do an EIA. Because that's the only way you're going to get the information to understand how to construct the project and how to mitigate to make sure that you construct properly and it operates properly. It's not to stop the project. You hear this thing with the, it's not to stop the project, it's to make sure that you do the work correctly.
Thank you, Doc. I know Thandika Percival has been waiting for a while with her hand up. Thandika, do you still have a question you wish to pose?
There was a bit of a follow-up to Nazima's question, Mr. Ramjatan. If from his experience within the judicial system, he can explain to us what are the parameters for a search of a private premises? What exactly are the minimum requirements for the police, whether it's SWAT or regular detective? Because we see here someone without warrant entering a premises in the wee hours of the morning. I'm not sure how legal that is, if you could clarify for us.
It is obviously not legal, Thandika, from all the circumstances that we now know about, especially from that statement of the surviving spouse of Orrin Boston, and also from some other statements that I have now, where they had previously done the same thing to another fella called Orrin Clark from Underweening at around 3 o'clock in the morning. And then from some other person who they had arrested and was already in their vehicle prior to that 3 o'clock. So like they had one prior to 3, they had Orrin Clark at 3 o'clock, and then they had at 4 o'clock, Boston. And it is broke down, the doors gain entry, and then handcuff every single member, even 11 and 9-year-old children, the only children that were not. This is totally unheard of in any judicial precedent and so on. And especially for people not well known to be, let's say, terrorists. Like if you're going to capture some Taliban, you're going to need a SWAT to go, knowing that they will have AK-47s ready to shoot at you. And in those circumstances, you generally get a court order. Or you can explain it on reasonable grounds, especially if thereafter you find a whole set of AK-47 and bullets and all of that. But where you have a prominent businessman, every day he goes and opens his shop. The CID in the area knows him very well. He goes to wedding houses and he dances, he enjoys himself with his family. You are now going to use a SWAT to go 4 o'clock in the morning? It is unheard of. It is most unconventional. And that is why I'm saying it's a violation of the procedural rules and standing orders for that SWAT team. And that is why the leadership in Georgetown headquarters say, well, we don't know the reason why the SWAT was there. And so it is totally unlawful, illegal, and what they did now as a consequence of their illegality is to hurt their reputation and so many other things. But it is totally out of order. The SWAT was literally doing a squat on territory that did not belong to them, in the sense of ethical it is, but also in the sense of the scenario that they had to do what they had to do there, meaning just to arrest somebody that was well known.
It is a bit of follow-up. Could you identify for us any specific standard of operation that was violated? For example, is there still a standard that police, I'm not sure of the accurate term, that police raid, police searches should only legally be carried out during daylight hours? Is that still part of the procedural rule?
I will have to go back to find the specifics of it, because the standing orders, which got all the procedural rules in relation to these matters, is about 1,000-page thick, and they got very minutely all the rules in relation to how you go and do these things. And then some of the rules can be hard to interpret, because you can technically make an argument that this was one that you could do so. And there might be borderline cases, but this was clearly a case where it was not supposed to be done. And then if it is going to be done, one of the policies that I had set, and also to support the policy, I had brought in a whole set of these cameras, body cams, especially when, because of serious allegations of people saying that how the police doing extrajudicial killing. Explain yourself by virtue of these cameras after the incident, by playing the cameras to see if the man was attacking, if the man pulled out a gun and whatever. They had no cameras in them. That is another violation of some of the rule. And administratively too, sometimes the rules are not stuck in there. Remember, I think Paul Slow and Conway were given a contract to rewrite the standing rules, to incorporate all of that. But even if it is not incorporated, and the minister with the commissioner arranged that whenever you're doing a SWAT thing, you got to put on your cameras, body cams, so that you can have a real situation now downloaded via the cams to know what really transpired there. But they did not. So it is totally unlawful, illegal, and breach of all the conventions and procedural operation matters.
Thank you. Can I ask the media if there are any other questions from anyone to any one of the two participants? Okay, I don't see any requests, so I do want to thank you all for joining us this morning, this afternoon, and I want to especially thank Dr. Vince Adams and Kamaraj Ramjatan for being part of this press conference. Please keep safe and have a safe and happy weekend. Thank you.
Thank you very much.